Who are Christian Zionists? Why do they support Israel? Do they promote evangelism for Jews? Today, my guest is Dr. Les Crawford. In 2017, Dr. Crawford joined the Friends of Israel and is currently the Australian Field Director. We met by chance near Warsaw and saw each other again at the amazing Museum of the History of Polish Jews in Warsaw called Polin. There I asked if Les could give an interview for my YouTube channel, and he kindly agreed. Dear Les, thank you for agreeing to be interviewed.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
In your letter after your visit to Poland, you wrote, "We visited Auschwitz-Birkenau from Krakow and experienced the testimony of Nazi evil on a horrendous scale, which was confronting and sobering. It is so important to remember the past as we encounter rising anti-Semitism so that we may speak out against it with credibility and genuine care." That brings me to a tragic Jewish jokes. How did Hitler die? Received the bill for gas.
Oh, yes, that is tragic.
To preserve themselves and continue to live, Jews had to create and tell such jokes. Can you say more about your thoughts and feelings after visiting those death camps? Are these lessons of history fading from the consciousness of modern people?
Yeah, certainly can. I'm still processing, I think, the experience of Auschwitz-Birkenau. I mean, the thing that was different for me was I've done Holocaust studies through Yad Vashem several years before we had the opportunity to visit the camps. We had planned to visit them much earlier, actually, but COVID knocked out that trip. And so this was a return to our original plans to go to Poland and to visit some of the Holocaust memorial sites, particularly Auschwitz-Birkenau. And the more I've reflected on it, it's really an experience just versus knowledge. I mean, I knew about what happened in the Holocaust. I knew what the final solution was. I knew the Nazi extermination camps existed, and I knew the numbers that were killed there. 6 million Jews, of course, in the total Holocaust. But it was actually being there, seeing the buildings, seeing the barbed wire fences, seeing the rail car that transported the Jewish people and others to that location, seeing the railway line going through the gates, all of that kind of substantiated the horror of the Holocaust. It made it very real, made it very indisputable. And I'm still staggered that there are Holocaust deniers or Holocaust minimalists today, because the evidence is there for you to see if you're willing to go and look on it. And it was deeply troubling because the mass murder of millions on the basis purely of their ethnicity, no other grounds, just purely, are you Jewish? Then you are subject to the horror of this place. So it is still kind of difficult to process. Um, but it was staring me. I mean, it was right in my face, the historical reality. And it kind of reinforced to me the depravity within humanity, that such hatred could be unleashed against one segment of humanity in particular because of their ethnicity, although many others suffered from the German machine to cleanse humanity and elevate the Aryan race and so on. Yeah, so I'm still working it through. I had the privilege just the other day of sharing a little bit about my solidarity trip to Israel back in November last year, and then our trip to Birkenau and trip to Auschwitz. And again, I just want more people to be fully aware of the reality of that. And I know that there's great other ministries doing that. Now, you asked the question about, do we think there's a fading of the history? And I think because of the passing of decades since the Holocaust, it's sort of inevitable that those distances are created further and further for each new generation. And so, unless as a society we ensure it's not forgotten, along with the lessons that it contains, then it will continue to fade. The Holocaust survivors, slowly and surely, they are all passing from this life, even though some of them have lived incredibly long lives, which is, again, another amazing reality. We do have a new Holocaust Museum and Study Centre here in Adelaide, which was the vision of a Holocaust survivor, Andrew Steiner. And so its program is not just to have visitors to the Holocaust Centre, which is a great place to visit, and it's small, but it's quite focused in communicating the past history. But they have an education program in the school system here in our state, particularly in our city, which is where it's more easily accessible, so that they can help students to know the full history associated not just with the Holocaust, but other ways in which minorities have been persecuted and discriminated against, and in many cases, butchered and killed. So yeah, we have to do something directly, intentionally, to maintain that memory. And I know they've done a lot of recordings of the Holocaust survivor stories, videos of them, as well as written testimonies of them, so that they're not lost when the last Holocaust survivor is no longer with us. But it is a diminishing reality. And I think the statistics tell us, whether it's the US or Australia, what happened in the Second World War, what did Nazi Germany try to accomplish, what is the history of the Jewish people under the Nazi regime. I think a lot of people in the younger generations don't know it. I mean, I'm a generation after World War II. I mean, I was born in 1954. So I'm not a war experienced person. My parents were the ones who went through the war. And so I'm just a little bit distant. But then you've got two more generations at least since me. So yeah, I do think it's an important question, and one that we should answer with practical steps.
Certainly, and I think that there was a lot of work done for ensuring that that history will not fade as much as it can, and there is still a lot of work to be done for that. In Poland, I visited several museums and art galleries. In one of them, I saw a painting by the artist Marusz Gottlieb, Christ teaching in Capernaum. Gottlieb's painting also adds distinctly Jewish elements, including the figure of Jesus, whom the artist expressly identifies as a practicing Jew. Jesus wears a talit, a prayer shawl, as he preaches with an open Torah scroll on the synagogue's bima. Many listeners there also wear shawls, talitot. Jesus as a Jew is offering a sermon to his fellow Jews directly near the Torah scroll. I'd like to ask you, do you think modern Christians, priests and congregants realize that Jesus was an observant Jew? That Jews and Christians have common texts and values, for example, such as to love your neighbor as yourself?
Yeah, I think you raise an important point, because that's a fairly unique painting. If you go back into the medieval period and you look at the European paintings of Jesus, they're not quite so Jewish in their portrayal of him. Uh, Nothing really to do with whether he has some of the Jewish signs of Jewishness, talit, the prayer shawl, before a Torah scroll. His facial features are not Jewish. The way in which he's styled in those paintings is not Jewish. So I think most Christians today don't really consider the ethnic identity of Jesus as a Jew. And part of that is what's informed them if they do any studies of the portraits of Jesus over time. And I think that lack of Middle Eastern or Jewish identity sort of distorts who Jesus is. It disconnects him from the Jewish people. It disconnects him even from the prophecies of his coming in the Old Testament. It really does create a problem. And I think another factor that sort of feeds into this is that a lot of Christians think of the New Testament scriptures as their texts, and they neglect the Old Testament scriptures, the Tanakh, as kind of like that they're sort of for another people, maybe the Jewish people, or another era, maybe before the Christian era. And so as a result, they lose the foundation of the continuity of the text. So they don't have the knowledge of Abraham, of the patriarchs, of the history leading up to the first century and the coming of Jesus. So uh, I think one of the factors that I remind people of, because I have a message on why we should be the friends of Israel. Often you have to persuade people that maybe either on one side or the other, not quite committed or definitely not committed to caring for the Jewish people in the nation. And I point out that, all the New Testament writers that we know of, there are a couple of potential anonymous ones, they're Jewish. The church began as completely Jewish on the day of Pentecost and in the early decades. It was only later when it became predominantly Gentile, as a result of the message going out to a wider audience, particularly through Paul, the apostle, that the Jewish segment of the church shrank and the Gentile segment of the church grew. And it became even antagonistic towards the Jewish people because they weren't welcoming this message of Jesus. And so that antagonism, unfortunately, has a very, very bad history. So I think there is a sense in which reminding people or even informing people that Jesus is really Jewish. He's not European. He's certainly not an Aussie or an American. He's Jewish. And that's one of the reasons why I'm quite passionate about the work I'm in, because the one that I love and serve is actually Jewish. So, boy, we owe an enormous debt to the Hebrews or the Israelites, foundationally so, and even the Jewish people who have lived since then, since the Tanakh completed, and from our point of view, the New Testament scriptures were added.
Certainly, you mentioned that there is some, or there were, I guess, some confrontation after the Jewish part of the church reign. I think that there is also a somewhat of maybe distrust from certain spiritual leaders, Jewish spiritual leaders, that fear to this day that evangelicals are helping to convert Jews. What do you think about this assertion?
Well, from our past conversations that I'm serving in a Christian mission that focus on the Jewish people and the nation of Israel. And by conviction, we believe that Jesus is that promised Messiah for the Jewish people and the world, not just the Jewish people. I'm not Jewish, I'm Scottish by ethnicity. Um, and it's because of Jesus being a savior and a Jew that we love the Jewish people. That's part of the motivation of our love. And we would hope and pray that Jewish people would recognize Jesus as their Messiah. We believe that would be a blessing for them to do so. But that's their decision. You know, if a Jew chooses to follow Jesus, and some do, we've had a number of Jewish Christians or Christian Jews, I don't know which way is the best way to say it, in our organization. And it may be the result of somebody who's an evangelical sharing what they believe with that person. But, no one can change a human heart. I can't go inside to a person and manipulate their internal reality, who they are. God's the only one who does those kind of works. So, in answer to your question, I think some Jewish spiritual leaders see evangelicals as kind of a threat to the Jewish way of life, both culturally and spiritually. In that if a Jewish person chose to follow Jesus, then their Jewishness would be eroded and eliminated. We don't believe that's the case. I don't think it's necessary for a person to renounce their Jewishness if they choose to follow Jesus. But there'll be changes. I mean, I was converted in my late teens as an atheist and an evolutionist. I came to follow the Lord Jesus, not from a religious home, uh, just basically a non-religious home, not an antagonistic one or one that was opposed to the church or the Christian faith, but one that had no real interest in it. So my dad particularly was very non-religious. And so when I came to that place where I wanted to follow Jesus, my life changed. Things weren't the same as they were before. Things changed. So I think that happens to anybody. You know, whatever faith you embrace, it's going to make a difference in your day-to-day life, in your relationships, perhaps, in how you view things. And that's part of it. That comes with the territory. So I guess the question is there a sort of a conniving, sort of manipulative kind of approach to try what you say, capture Jewish people? I think those kind of things are very unacceptable. It's a face-to-face engagement with friendship and shared views, and people make choices, and those choices can be, huge, very, very, very big changes in their lives. But so some of the Jewish people I know who are followers of Jesus, they still keep their Jewishness. They can practice weekly. They can have Shabbat dinners. They can have festivals and all of those things. But they have a slightly different meaning now. They've got an enhanced meaning, really, for most of them. So yeah, I can understand how there's a sense in which, oh, we don't want to let these Christians around because they're going to mess up things for us. But I hope that that's not their real experience if they do meet Christians.
Thank you for that answer, and I think that a lot of the times the things we think and when we are afraid to experience something or to even start the conversation, we're losing a lot of um, possibilities for peace as well when we're not
Mm.
hearing the other side because we're afraid what they're gonna say. That's not very productive. So I think
Yes,
that that's great that there are such organization and such people that we can have that dialogue.
yes, I agree.
I'd like to quote a famous Psalm 137. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. What do you think about Zionism? About the desire of many Jews to live in Israel to make Aliyah to rise to Zion?
Well, first of all, I would say to you that I'm a Christian Zionist. Now, what I mean by that is I believe that the Jewish people have a right to their own both identity nationally and location. And of course, when the movement to establish a homeland for the Jewish people in their ancient land, the land of Canaan, the Promised Land, Judea, Samaria, or Palestine as it's known most commonly today, uh, that was Zionism, basically. But as a Christian, I'm fully supportive of that. To rightly uh, live in, prosper in, thrive in their homeland, their ancient homeland, I think is fantastic. So I kind of think it's sort of natural, if not mandatory, for Jews to be Zionists, and that moving to Israel would be a practical expression of that sort of perspective, that belief in that sort of philosophy, really, I guess. And making Ali is probably the best way to preserve and protect the Jewish people. Uh, I live in Australia. Australia has traditionally been very supportive of the nation of Israel. We have a long history with the land. And so I'm disappointed that in recent times our Prime Minister and our Foreign Minister have taken a much more negative stance towards Israel. And there's been a huge what would you call it? uproar against Israel, and with that, at the popular level, particularly from the Arab Muslim community, there's been a lot of protests and rallies, pro-Palestinian, very anti-Israel. And alongside of all of that, there's been a huge amount of anti-Semitism in our country. And so I've heard of Jewish families in Australia who don't feel safe anymore in Australia and want to relocate to a war zone, Israel. And people might think, goodness me, you've got to be kidding me. Why would you move from Australia, which is a very peaceful, prosperous nation, to a place right now that's conducting a war in Gaza, who've got threats from multiple fronts? Well, because in Israel, you have somewhat control over your own destiny as a Jewish person. But if you're in another country, you're subject to whatever government is there and whatever majority is there. And of course, the Jewish people have learned over time that that doesn't always work out very well for them. Even if they've been well established in the society, have been well accepted, it seems, in the society, but things can change, and I've sadly seen them change rapidly. Now, I do think there's pushback on that. So there are movements now that are against anti-Semitism, which is a very positive thing. So, but not being subject to a non-Jewish government, but being subject to a Jewish government primarily. I mean, the Knesset's not 100% Jewish. There are Arabs in the Knesset, but it's a majority Jewish state, and it will protect its citizens, whether they're Arabs or Jews or Druze. It's going to protect those citizens. So, yeah, I think Zionism is, it's kind of a dream realized. We have a book that we publish called It Is No Dream, which is reflecting on, the history of Zionism and the fact that the dream has been fulfilled, not completely yet, but certainly well on the way. So, yeah, I'm very positive towards Zionism, but it's not a popular position to have here in Australia, I can tell you that. Uh, they would see you as supporting a state which is guilty of many, many serious crimes, which unfortunately are misrepresented to the media and from the media. Uh, so I'm not in that camp.
We have talked about Zionism as an idea and what it has become now, but what do you think about the modern state of Israel, what it has become, sort of that idea on the way? What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, I'm very impressed with the modern state of Israel. I've been to Israel several times. I've obviously seen these things before I went to Israel and read about them, saw photos, and I knew what the Old Testament said, that the land would blossom again, even though when Mark Twain visited Israel, he considered it a dreary land without any real future. He thought that the nature of the desert wasn't even supporting the cactus and the things that normally would thrive in a desert. His view of Israel when he toured it was very negative back in the 1800s. Uh, and a lot of people's images of Israel, of course, are deserts, mountains, rocks. They don't have the idea of Israel being a flourishing agricultural country, but also a flourishing democracy. A lot of people don't realize that Israel is actually the only democracy in that Middle Eastern area which has an elected representation, the representation of the Jewish and the Arab populations. And so it's a liberal, secular, democratic country. And there are good things about that. There's freedoms in Israel which don't exist in some of the surrounding Arab states, especially the Muslim states. There are expressions of that freedom which are across the whole spectrum, whether it's in the area of politics, And you know how hard it is for Israel to form government. There's so many different opinions about what is right for the country. It's across the whole issue of social, moral issues, um, religion, across the religion issue, even though the ultra-Orthodox tend not to be particularly happy about any other faith gaining ground or traction in the nation. But legally, you're free to practice your faith. If you're a Christian, you can have a church. If you're a Muslim, you can have a mosque. If you're something else, you can have that in Israel. So I'm impressed with the modern state of Israel, technologically, agriculturally, in all of those areas, especially where it is, especially being in the Middle East, where other states before Islamic takeovers like Iran, which we call Persia, Persia before the basically takeover of the Ayatollahs and let's say not radical but strong Islamic faith and extreme in terms of terrorism that they support and are, it was a very different country. Lebanon similarly. So for Israel to stay its course and to hold its line is in itself a miracle. Their existence in 1948 is a miracle. Their continuing existence is a testimony to, I think, God's favor upon them, but also their ingenuity, their resilience, their steadfastness, their commitments. Our young people don't get any military training like every person that is 18 or above who's a part of the Israeli society. And I think we're actually a little worse off because of it. I think there's something helpful about including all of your civilian population in unity for the security and future of your nation. I think there's real power in that. So I'm impressed, very impressed.
Definitely, and I think it's amazing to walk around Tel Aviv of this day and understanding that before not that long ago there wasn't much there. So that
Mm.
is truly impressive. More than 80 years ago, the International Evangelical Ministry, Friends of Israel, FOI, was founded to help Jews who were tragically affected by the Holocaust. You're the director of the organization in Australia. Please tell us about the theological convictions of your assistance to Jews in Israel.
Yeah, it's an interesting story, the story of our mission. As you've mentioned, 1938 was when the mission started, and it was a response to the obvious distress and need of Jewish refugees. So it began as a refugee or a relief agency more than the extended version of what it is today. And there were American pastors and businessmen, leaders who saw that need and they wanted to meet that need. But there was a bit more behind it. It wasn't just a humanitarian compassion, which we should have towards people in need. It was more along the lines of what they believed the scriptures revealed to them, the convictions they had, their faith convictions. And they did believe that the Jewish people had a future, that the nation of Israel had a future. And that future was, in a sense, under threat. I mean, if Hitler had achieved his goal, he would have eradicated the Jewish presence in Europe and wherever else he was able to exercise his leadership and authority, and there wouldn't have been a Jewish people. Now, of course, because of all the diasporas, the Jewish people are all over the place. They're in multiple countries, including our own. So reaching them all is not that easy. But he was certainly well on the way to eradicating the Jewish population of Europe, as the statistics so horribly reveal. And so this perspective of we have to intervene as best we can as a little small group doing a very little at the time, just providing some practical resources to Jewish refugees, it flowed out of that biblical conviction. And that's why they called the mission not the friends of the Jewish people or the friends of the chosen people, and there's a number of different organizations that have different names. Chosen People Ministries is one example. They called it the Friends of Israel. And Israel didn't exist as a nation then. Wouldn't exist for another 10 years. And I remember one of our representatives here in Australia met the ambassador to Australia, the Israeli ambassador to Australia, at a, a gathering of Christian support for Israel. He went up and introduced himself and said, I'm Colin Laturi, I work with this organization. And he said, the Friends of Israel. He said, yeah, we started in 1938. And he kind of looked at Colin and thought, 1938? Israel didn't exist in 1938. And Colin said, yeah, that's true, but we believed they would exist because the Bible had taught that, what we believed. And so our orientation was not just the friends of the Jewish people, but the friends of the nation. Now, we know it's a secular nation. We know that the nation is not perfect. We know that they're going to make mistakes like Australia makes mistakes and everybody else makes mistakes. But in principle, our support is based on the Old Testament text, promises to Abraham, promises to the patriarchs, even to David. Those kind of things inform what we believe. And so they literally took on board the Genesis 12 and Genesis 15 passages, blessing for those who bless and cursing for those who curse. So in that sense, our work that focuses on the physical needs of the nation is out of compassion, but it's out of conviction. And somebody said it was like theological convictions met an ethnic crisis, which resulted in compassionate action. And that's kind of what happened. And it's grown a lot since then, of course. It was only a small organization at the beginning, but God has blessed us, and we've got people over the world and much stronger and more capable of helping the Jewish people.
Thank you so much. And you mentioned about how your organization helps Israel. Could you tell a little more about that? And I heard that there is a special ambulance for Israel where there is even a possibility of operating on people. So could you share a little more about all of that?
Sure. I mean, our mission has two main areas of focus. One is teaching about Israel and the Jewish people in churches, conferences, and other types of meetings. We provide online resources and other materials because we believe just as the Holocaust can be forgotten, there can be ignorance or even rejection of, we believe, what God says about the nation of Israel and the Jewish people. So that's part of my responsibility. I'm one who speaks in churches on a regular basis. We're just in New Zealand. Last weekend, we had a conference on the Saturday. I spoke in the church on Sunday morning, and all of that is to either inform those who are needing informed, sometimes interact with people who don't agree with this understanding, and in many cases equip Christians to know how to best live out their faith in view of what God's plan is for Israel. But the other area, which was our foundational area, is to bring spiritual and physical comfort to the Jewish people. That's part of our tagline, which is how we started, and it's still part of our DNA, even though the Jewish refugee problem was resolved because the Jewish refugees from both the Second World War and then from all the Arabs pushing them out of their countries, probably 700,000 of them, they were all absorbed either into European or Western nations or Israel itself. So there aren't really technically refugees, but there are still many poor Jewish communities. And there are also, in situations like Israel is facing, there are great needs that no government can cover. And so one of our jobs is to raise funds and to work with partner organizations in Israel, but also work with our representatives across multiple countries, particularly Poland and Ukraine, where that's where we met when I was catching up with some of our staff in Poland and wanting to see the Holocaust memorial sites. But in Ukraine and in Argentina, we have work there that are either at a humanitarian level of providing food and shelter and resources for poor and or war-stricken communities, like in Ukraine, or in Argentina, it's a medical clinic and ambulance service to support the large Jewish community, which is a very unusual place for them to be, but they escaped there, as so did a lot of Nazis. So it's kind of a funny, ironic sort of location. But when it comes to Israel, when I was in Israel back in November last year, we were visiting our partners. We were only there for 7 days to see what they're doing firsthand, because I hadn't seen what they were doing firsthand in most cases, and to present them with grants so that they could continue their work. And we're only one of many organizations that support these different partners. So we have things like Zad Kadima, which is a cerebral palsy care in education for 2 years old to adulthood, and they support their development as mentally, emotionally, physically, and that's an amazing work that they do. That's in the Tel Aviv area. We also support Lechet, which is the food bank of Israel that has been in overdrive, I think, probably since the war began. A lot of people don't realize, but there are issues of not being able to put meals on the table for a Jewish family or even an Arab family in Israel. As much as it's a very prosperous nation, in wartime, things are very tight, just like they are in any war situation. You know, my parents remember the rationing in the UK during the war. You know, you couldn't just go out and buy everything on the supermarket shelves. You had rationing. So even in a wartime in a prosperous nation, you can have an impact on people's daily lives. So supporting Leket, we had the opportunity to actually help do some sorting of food. We were sorting potatoes and eggplant, getting it organized for distribution to those who need. And it has an amazing distribution network, which they could use for other things, not just food. We've also had a relationship with Beit Helachem, which is the House of the Warriors, the place where they rehabilitate wounded government officers, particularly soldiers. Obviously, in wartime, there are many casualties, lots of deaths, of course, but many more wounded that need to be brought back to some normality of life. And again, visiting that center was quite eye-opening. One of the things we've done for a long time is Operation Life Shield, working with Rabbi Bowman, which places either bomb shelters or missile shelters or assists with safe rooms in more of the remote communities, let's say the kibbutzim, who don't have the means of doing that for themselves. It's not in the hotels and in the big cities because they basically build them in modern complexes. They get included, but a lot of these places don't have the protection from the rockets that have been fired so relentlessly. But one of the very precious moments was to go to the headquarters of Magen David Adom, the MDA, which is the ambulance service in India, in Israel, and just interestingly, one of our representatives here is in Perth, Western Australia. He's the president of MDA in Perth. He's a Gentile, but he has a real passion to help the Jewish community. And he's been so highly respected that they said, "Oh, we want you to be president." And he was quite taken aback by that. But, you know, Jewish people are quite savvy, you know, that they kind of know where things are at. And they thought, well, if we have a Gentile president, we won't just get the Jewish community, we'll get the Christian community as well. So their extension of their influence and obviously drawing the support in, which has been evidenced. I mean, the amount of people that Kevin has drawn into that network, supporting them practically in financial gifts, has been pretty positive. But at the headquarters, we saw their call center, which is amazing. The technology they have to support sending help to anybody that's needing it medically, whether it's a car accident, whether it's a medical episode with one's health or whatever it is, the immediacy of what they can do is quite remarkable. And I love the medi-cycles. I think it's a great idea to get through a city quickly. Getting an ambulance, large, bulky vehicle through the city traffic is tough, but a motorcycle will get through much quicker. But we had the privilege when we were there. One of the things that FOI does is raise funds for MDA, and they raised sufficient funds to actually buy an intensive care ambulance. This is an ambulance that can, as you mentioned, conduct surgery on site in emergency situations. It doesn't obviously do every surgery that might be needed, but it can do surgeries that other ambulances aren't equipped to do. And they're very expensive ambulances. You're talking about hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And Jim Showers, who is our CEO, our head of the mission internationally from the USA, he and I were able to release the cover over the engraving on the side of the ambulance front driver's, well, actually it was a passenger door in this case, it's on both doors, that it was a gift from the Friends of Israel. So that was a pretty precious moment for us in Israel. We also have an Australian-based project that we support in Israel, which is to do with fighting fires and preventing fires. And so there's a guy who's very highly qualified in this area, and we funded several trips that he's made to Israel to train people on how do you fight a fire when a fire occurs, and what do you do to make sure a fire can't occur. And that's been a real blessing for us to be a partner with him and his organization to be able to help. Because for some time, not so much in recent times, but there's been a lot of incendiary attacks on Israel. And of course, if you're not prepared for those, or if the preventative work hasn't been done, then a lot of devastation can occur. We know all about fires here in Australia. Bushfires are quite common here, and they're devastating when they get out of control. So that trip and those projects that we've been involved in, basically our donors are the ones who are doing all the hard work. They're the ones who are providing the funds. We're just making the connections and channeling those funds in the right places with not just the money in the bank, but our heartfelt support that goes with it. That's important to us. It's interesting, when I talk about the Ukraine, I mean, we've been in the Ukraine for a long time, well before the war broke out with Russia. And it's amazing how sometimes you're already where you need to be. You've actually, in the providence of God, He's organized that you would be in the right place when something was needed. And that's been true of Tatiana and Yuri and her family. They've been in the right place when they were needed. And they live in Kiev. They are still constantly under threat from these Russian aggressive attacks, which are focused often on civilian targets and not really military ones. But their courage and their compassion is fueled by their faith. They believe that this is something that is a calling from God. So, humanitarian aid, food kitchens in Ukraine, medical facilities in Argentina, whatever we can help in that we have the capacity to do. And we have had, millions of dollars raised since October the 7th, 2023, from donors across Europe, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, USA, that have enabled us to do the things that we've done. So we're just agents. We're not really, I'm not giving out millions from my own pocket. It just happens to come through people who love the Jewish people and love the nation of Israel.
Well, thank you so much for all amazing work you and your organization are doing. I think right now, both the state of Israel and the Jewish people welcome all the help they can get. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome.
Thank God you and your wife Elizabeth are blessed with 3 children and 8 grandchildren. Have you managed to convey to your loved ones the desire to build bridges of friendship with the Jewish people? Could you tell your family story?
Yeah, you're right. We do have three adult children who are married, and they've had combined eight grandchildren. So we have a son, a daughter, and a son. So Daniel, Rebecca, and David are our three children, and they're married. Rebecca's actually married to Carl, who is the pastor of the church that we attend. It's actually a new church. The church was started only 4.5 years ago, so it's a very young church. It now has 79 members. It will vary in attendance, but around 70 to 100 people attend on a frequent weekly basis. And so for my daughter Rebecca and for Carl, her husband, they are fully on board when it comes to my convictions concerning Israel and the Jewish people. And the thing that you have to realize is that Adelaide has a very small Jewish community. I mean, the Progressive Synagogue at Shalom, they would struggle at times to have 10 male attendees to have a full service. There's a Chabad, and there's an older traditional synagogue as well. I think it's just the Hebrew congregation, I think, is how they're known. And they're very small. So in terms of engagement with the Jewish community, there's not a lot of practical expression that Beck and Carl can do. Now, I do because it's part of my mission work. I mean, I connect with Jewish community services in Adelaide. I haven't connected with the new rabbi yet. They've got a new rabbi at the Progressive Synagogue. I've met the rabbi at the Chabad. We've met at vigils for the return of the hostages. He's been present at one of them that I was present at, along with my wife Elizabeth. But they are very much on board when it comes to understanding what God's plan is and what God's heart is towards the Jewish people. But really don't. I mean, they're so busy with a young family, they're busy with the church community that they don't have a lot of time. Whereas I don't say I've got lots of time, but I've got plenty of time to work alongside of the Jewish community where it's feasible, where it's needed. For both my boys, they're married, but they're not attending church like we are. Now, they love the focus I have on Israel. They love the fact that my heart is for the Jewish people, but they don't really have the same heart that I do. Now, they wouldn't buy into anti-Semitism. They wouldn't buy into any of the radical stuff that's out there, but they're not actively involved in building bridges with the Jewish community. Because again, practically speaking, there isn't a lot of opportunity unless you go out and beyond. I mean, if they had Jewish neighbours, I'm sure they'd be good friends. But they don't. One of my sons has a 25-acre property up in the Adelaide Hills. His neighbours are quite remote from him. And Daniel and his wife Jade are in a nice suburb of the city of Adelaide. And they're busy with family. The oldest of our grandchildren is 10, and the youngest are 4. So they're quite young, and we're certainly influencing them for their spiritual good, for their faith journey. But they're probably too young yet to really understand the issues that we're addressing and that we're dealing with as adults. But it is our goal and our hope that they will continue to understand God's plan for the church, for the nation of Israel, for the Jewish people. And maybe, who knows, maybe one or more of them would get a real heart to be involved in a very practical and direct way as they become adults and find out where God's leading them in their lives. But yeah, the situation is a work in progress. I'd say that's what I would say it would be. But there's no mistaking the fact that you are significantly influential as parents and grandparents in the life of your children and your grandchildren. And we are blessed to have them very close by. I mean, the furthest we have to go to visit our grandchildren's 20 to 25 minutes. You know, not everybody has the benefit of their 8 grandchildren within a short distance. We do, and so we intentionally spend time with them, and they obviously want us to spend time with them, especially if they've got an event on and they need someone to look after them. We'll probably be the first people that gets a phone call, especially my wife Elizabeth, who's very generous with her time and her energy. Uh, but yeah, and we've had great conversations with my boys, particularly about current events, and inevitably Israel's in the media, Israel's in the news, and so there's always questions. And they know we're going to Israel in October, November, because we're not going to be around to help with the grandkids. And so they'll ask us questions about, why are we going and what are we doing there? And then when we get back, they'll say, how did it go and what was it like? And so we keep sowing those seeds of truth and seeds of love and compassion into their hearts as well. But you need to do it. It doesn't happen accidentally. If you listen to the media, you would be a you'd be very negative towards Israel. I mean, the way the media portrays the nation. Uh, I just was listening to a UN Watch report today, and the misinformation and the deception from the UN, from UNRWA, it's horrendous. And I can still not really comprehend how people don't get it. They still believe a terrorist organization tells the truth. They believe the statistics. They believe the reports. Um, and I would never believe a terrorist organization. Just like I wouldn't believe someone knocking on my front door who's a convicted felon and just escaped from prison, that he would have my best interest in view. Why would they? And why should I trust them? So it's continuing the message from generation to generation. I mean, that's what Moses taught the Israelites. You have to pass it on generation to generation to generation, because it doesn't happen by accident. It doesn't happen by chance. It happens by intentionality.
Certainly. And I think that's great also to talk about it in the family and to discuss that. We do that with my parents, obviously, and my friends and family. And yeah, I think that's a great way to kind of speak what you think is right and express that.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
have an
Silence is not golden. Silence is yellow. It's cowardice. You need to speak up.
yes.
You were going to say something.
I have an unexpected question. It is
Sure.
somewhat traditional on my channel. If you had the opportunity to ask God one question, what would that question be?
Oh, wow. It's an unexpected question. At a very personal level, I'd probably ask this question: why am I a Christian and no one else in my biological family are, in terms of cousins and uncles and parents and so on? Because I'm the only one within that Crawford clan before our own children and our grandchildren. So it's kind of a bit of a mystery question. Why me and not others? Now, that story's not finished yet, obviously, but it is one where I think that's a great what's the word for it? To me, it's a testimony to God's care and love and compassion, but it's also the mystery of being one of many. And I have a very good and close relationship to my older cousin, Richard, who lives in Geelong, in Victoria, Australia. He's 10 years older than me. He lived with us. My mum had a lot to do with his upbringing. And his wife Lola's very sweet, and their family are gorgeous. And we have often these discussions about faith, and I am fully persuaded, and he's not. So, the journey we have is pretty unique. So that's a very personal question. I mean, another kind of question, which is not so much a personal question, but a question in the larger context. Um, I'm a theologian by profession, and so I kind of think about theological topics, and one of the topics is why didn't you interrupt the temptation of Eve in the Garden of Eden so that the mess that we're now in might have not occurred? And again, that's a question I don't have an answer to. I'm sure God knows what's best and has done what's best, but they're the kind of ways I think and the mysteries that I consider. And in the end result, I'll wait till I get to heaven and to glory, and maybe the question will be answered, or maybe it won't be relevant anymore. Who knows?
Well, those are great questions. Thank you so much for the time and the great opportunity to learn from you.
Thank you, Daniel. It was great meeting you and your mum and dad in Poland. And who knows, maybe we'll meet again, maybe in Israel or maybe back in Europe or wherever. I don't know. We've certainly had some of those odd connections that have occurred. So it's been my pleasure to be able to spend some more time with you and trust that you would continue to do well with your channel, your pod, and also with your heart to find peaceful ways in which people can come together and be benefited by one another.
Thank you so much, and thank you for what you do for the Jewish people. Um, Dear friends, thank you for watching my channel. Please react to the podcast, like, repost. All reactions are very, very welcome and important to me. See you soon on the podcast.